Welcome to the fourth of 4 episodes of Feedstuffs Swine Healthline, brought to you by Pharmgate Animal Health and focused on Mycoplasma hyopneumoniae. I'm Sarah Muirhead. Today we'll learn from a more practical standpoint about the conducting of M-hyo elimination programs. M-hyo is a challenging pathogen that hinders pig growth and producer profitability. But should you control it or work to eliminate it? We'll hear about practical on-farm experiences with eliminating M-hyo, the benefits of developing an elimination program, as well as the factors that veterinarians should take into consideration when moving from M-hyo control to elimination. This guest will also share the lessons she's learned and will use in the future to improve elimination programs as well as guilt monitoring programs. Our guest is Dr. Amy Maschhoff, Associate Director of Health for the Maschhoffs, LLC. Dr. Maschhoff earned her veterinary degree from the University of Illinois and began her career as herd veterinarian for the Maschhoffs. Now she serves in a more central role for the Maschhoff system, as well as supports the health assurance programs for the Acuity Genetics. Dr. Maschhoff also served on the National Pork Producers Council Swine Veterinary Public Policy Advocacy Program, and she's actively enrolled in the University of Illinois Swine Executive Veterinary Program. Over to you, Dr. Maschhoff.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. I think anytime we talk about Mycoplasma, it's nice to do hey, let's talk about what is Mycoplasma. I know that if you've listened to some of these other podcasts, you've probably heard that Mycoplasma is bacteria, it causes pneumonia, and it's problematic in the swine industry, but it really is, as you think about it from a practitioner perspective, it causes that chronic, persistent, non-productive cough. And you'll see it in late finishing for weeks to months. It really does cause impact not only to pig health, but their growth is slowed. They have decreased feed efficiency. And as we know from experience in the field, because Mycoplasma lacks a cell wall, it's really tough to control, especially in situations where you get co-infections with viruses like PRRS or influenza. And so from my system experience and production experience, Mycoplasma was one of those bugs that always came in right when you're almost to the finish line. I hated those calls from our operations team and production partners that had pigs that are ready to top or in the middle of marketing, and pigs are coughing, dry hacking cough, they're sick, morbidity is high, growth rates slow down, so you have to make all types of adjustments in how you're going to send pigs out of the site at the finish line. And so in 2016 and 2017, our system took what we literally called the sledgehammer approach. We were giving pigs vaccines and antibiotics at weaning. We were also doing some proactive pulses in our finishing populations, and we looked at ourselves and said, this is not sustainable for a long-term health of our system and not sustainable from a judicious antibiotic use in the long run. So what are we going to do about it? And in our system, we took this strategy because we are designed really kind of a semen to shackle approach. We want to constantly be looking at what those value add investments are. And Mycoplasma started to become one of those topics that we said it's a value add investment. And so we wanted to look at the impact of how we could decrease cost in our most valuable finishing animals. And so we reached out to some industry experts and said, hey, talk about the benefit cost analysis that you did in your herds. I wouldn't say we were the first ones to jump on it, but as the industry started talking about it, we said, hey, if the payback period really is 2 to 7 months after you start making a Mycoplasma negative pig, let's really look at the investment of doing this in our system. So we did, and we have about 80% of the herds in the Maschhoff system that are negative for Mycoplasma today. Our aim is probably to get to 95% negative, with a little leeway now as we've had some lessons learned that I'll talk about later, that there may be some farms that the answer isn't elimination, the answer is controlled stable. I would tell you with that, though, the overarching idea and strategy for our system is to not have Mycoplasma and to have negative herds. And so what are my on-farm experiences? I would tell you that when you eliminate Mycoplasma from your herd, you have to think about time, You have to think about time, and you have to think about time. Eliminating from Mycoplasma from a sow farm takes about 40 weeks. If you really look at some of the papers, Maria Peters actually has some really interesting study. When you think about Mycoplasma shedding is greater than 240 days. So your closure time has to match the science that we know about Mycoplasma shedding dynamic. And then with a myco closure, you have to think about your labor bandwidth. As our industry continues to talk more about labor, doing a Mycoplasma elimination does take more time on top of our team's day jobs. And with that, there's also cost associated. So we spent about 25 to 45 bucks a sow. We did mass injections of antibiotics into sows, combinations of vaccines to sows. Depending on the closure design, we did a subset of feed or antibiotics via the water. And then we also did programs where we would give antibiotics to piglets during that closure time. We also, in a few scenarios based on the pig flow dynamic, did a few closures that included medicated early weaning as well. And so there's a lot of experience associated with that has made us now, if we have herds that rebreak or herds that failed closure, or if we add new herds into our system, that we've got some lessons learned that we'll do before elimination programs in the future. As I mentioned earlier, we'll think about the timing of it. We'll try to plan ahead relative to those production parameters such as summer infertility and the pig flow dynamic. So if you think about if your pigs are flowing into an all-in, all-out finishing system or a continuous flow system, there's a different dynamic of how you're going to want to set up your closure, because you're not going to want to wean a myco-negative wean pig into a continuous flow site. You're really going to want to dump that site before you put those negative pigs in, or you're not going to get the return on investment that you're looking for. As well as in lots of situations, we put our Mycoplasma closures piggybacked on top of a PRRS closure. So if we had a farm that was mycopositive that broke with PRRS, because PRRS closures are taking so long today, we thought, well, let's just get rid of myco at the same time. You're also, in the future, I think lessons learned for us is we'll learn a little bit more about the sensitivity. I don't know that we ran a lot of sensitivity panels before Mycoplasma closures in the past, but we've really looked at that today. So if you are looking to do a Mycoplasma closure, make sure that you're really coordinating with your vet on, is this bacteria that you specifically have in your herds, or this type of myco, sensitive to the antibiotics you want to use in your elimination program. As well as really think about how you're going to communicate. What's the schedule? What week are you going to do what task? Our team typically does a good job of making an Excel file or some type of timeline that we end up posting on the farm that says, hey, in week 2 of closure, you're doing X project. But in week 10 of closure, you're doing X, and then in week 35, you're also going to do X as part of the elimination to make sure you don't miss those steps along the way. And the other thing I would say is look at your gilts. What is the status of your incoming gilts? Because you don't want to eliminate Mycoplasma if you're going to turn around and when you open the herd, you have a mycopositive population coming right back in. And then what age of gilt are you getting into your farm? What is the flow structure of your gilt development system? How is that going to impact the investment of your elimination program? And then the other thing that's come into play in the last couple of years for our system is really, are you going to monitor after you eliminate? Are you going to respond differently to Mycoplasma as well? And then before you eliminate, also think about your area risk. What are your neighbors doing? Communicate with those systems and the vets around you. What is the risk that you're going to ensue? Similar to thinking about if you're going to eliminate PRRS. What's the risk of that herd being a various status for PRRS? Are you going to run in a vaccinated, naive herd? We can start thinking about Mycoplasma in that similar manner as well. And then it wouldn't be a talk from a veterinarian if I didn't say don't skip the conversations about biosecurity. If you are going to spend 25 to 45 bucks a sow and 40 weeks to close a herd, you cannot skip the conversations about how you're going to keep it out in the long run. And so we've continued to challenge ourselves in our processes of Can we keep it out once we eliminate and not skip that biosecurity continues to be a really important aspect of any disease elimination program? So what are the big lessons learned for our system? We've had 2 rebreaks, or what I would call unsuccessful closures, and I presume 1 new rebreak from a potential gilt source that entered into our herds. And so big changes for us in future closures will be, as I mentioned earlier, looking at antibiotic sensitivity panels. And then another unique thing that we've spent a lot of time in our system looking at is establishing a day 0. So when you close a herd for PRRS, for example, lots of times we'll go in and we'll do an LVI or a vaccination program, and you get all of the animals on the same playing field. With Mycoplasma, we really didn't do a good job of doing that at the beginning, and so we were closing herds that probably didn't have a great day 0 as we went from our genetic herds down to our commercial herds. We started having a mixed bag of positive and negative animals in that populations at closures. And so now we've really improved our exposure program for establishing that day 0. Originally, we were doing intratracheal inoculation, but we did that at 1 GDU with our ops team, and I can tell you that they did not enjoy that. Very labor-intensive day, and somebody in some casual conversation said, hey, what if we tried to fog the pigs? And so a more technical term would be to use a nebulization method, and we just say fogging a lot from a layman's term perspective in our system. But we utilize a fogging protocol to establish that day 0. So creating a lung homogenate and then administering that to pigs in a non-invasive way via fogging. And so, as I've mentioned earlier, the other lesson learned and big takeaway for us is thinking about, can your farm eliminate, or does your farm need to maintain a stable status? If you are in a high-risk area, are there specific places where elimination is not necessarily the ideal scenario? But for us, in a lot of cases, we really feel like the payback is there. So elimination is where we've leaned in the last couple years as our gold standard for our system. I would tell you, we don't know what we don't know. Mycoplasma transmission hasn't been as well described as other viruses and bacteria in our industry. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity to look at, how is Mycoplasma really transmitted? If we have herds that are eliminated, how are we really going to keep it out? Referencing back to my comments about you can't skip those conversations relative to biosecurity. And then the other thing that's been really unique for us, because we have Acuity Genetics partnered with the Maschhoff system and other customers out there, is our mindset for Mycoplasma has really changed from an endemic pathogen to an epidemic pathogen. So we've made massive changes to what our health assurance program is. If you think about in the past, if you had coughing gilts in your isolation or your GDU, a lot of times I'll jokingly say our team kind of laughs, it's flu, bring them in anyway. But your mindset has to change when you have a Mycoplasma eliminated herd and a Mycoplasma negative herd. So how are you going to monitor for your gilts that are coughing? You have to take it in a different light, a different mindset when you have a herd that's negative. The unique thing about Mycoplasma monitoring programs, though, is that typically in health assurance, when we think about PRRS and PED, we can use oral fluids or we can use serum, which are commonly used tools in health assurance. But we've decided that we're really going to go past that, because those are not the greatest diagnostic sample for Mycoplasma. Those traditional samples don't have the sensitivity as tracheal swabs today. There's some really good research out there by Amanda Sponheim, Melissa Betlach, Maria Clavio, and some internal data that we've done ourselves that talks about the sensitivity of tracheal swabs. You're going to take that swab and you're actually going to try to get past the larynx and into the ciliated epithelium and the trachea. It is a little bit different. It's a unique technique that's out there. More people are learning how to do it and getting comfortable with it. I would tell you within our system that myself and some of the other veterinarians on the Maschhoff team, as well as our vet techs, can probably do about 35 tracheal samples in 45 minutes to an hour. So it is a technique that can be learned. But the unique thing about it is that the sensitivity, the sample quality and quantity needed is very different than the ease of collecting oral fluids. Our time to detection for Mycoplasma is different than our traditional health assurance monitoring programs for viruses. So don't forget that Myco is a bacteria. So as we look at our incoming gilts, we really have to tell ourselves to have different expectations for preventing it coming into our herds, and what's your risk tolerance level with your health assurance program. Ours today is try to keep it out. And we're going to get comfortable with maybe sometimes not being able to have that 95.5 confidence for Mycoplasma, but we want to have something today because of all the things that I've mentioned earlier, that there's a benefit to having myco-negative pigs, and it takes a lot of time to get it out of the herds. So we want to have some layer of protection on our incoming animals coming in. The end results for us are really that we've benefited from Mycoplasma elimination within our system. We've had improved feeder to market grade A anywhere in the ballpark from 2 to 3%. I would say I could also probably tell you we're 10 to 14 days faster to market. And the big kicker here is we've had substantial vet med savings on our finishing pigs. Our break even is anywhere from 18 to 26 months after a myco elimination in our sow herd. And it's been really nice in the past few years to not have those late term finishing calls with pigs that aren't being able to walk on the truck as readily as they were before. So I encourage you to look at your options for either control or elimination from Mycoplasma, because I think this is a bacteria that we've continued to learn on and can continue to win against in the future.
That was Dr. Amy Maschhoff, Associate Director of Health for the Maschhoffs, LLC. Today's discussion on Mycoplasma hyopneumoniae and its role in swine respiratory disease is the fourth in a four-part series being brought to you by Pharmgate Animal Health. As Dr. Maschhoff explained, M-hyo has a complex and costly interaction with pigs. However, veterinarians and producers do have options for controlling, eliminating, and monitoring for M-hyo. M-hyo is a significant contributor to swine respiratory disease. One choice for the control of SRD is Avlacin water-soluble granules. This is a product that was approved this year for the control of M-hyo, giving it the broadest label indication for any product for the control of swine respiratory disease. What about you? Do you have questions for Dr. Maschhoff? What strategies are working well for you to control M-hyo? Please email your questions and comments to swinehealthline@pharmgate.com. That is swinehealthline@pharmgate.com. I'm Sarah Muirhead. Thank you for listening to Feedstuffs Swine Healthline.